Hi and welcome. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, Presbyterian minister of 3 congregations in Eastern Ontario, and thank you for joining us for this week's Bible study. This week, we're looking at different Bible translations and how can you sort of judge them and what's going on and what are you looking for as you're trying to figure out which translation is best for you. And this is the last Bible study until the fall. In the fall, we'll be starting up sometime in September, still Wednesday afternoons at 2 p.m. And we're going to be looking a bit at the timeline for the Bible, a bit at the angels, and then we go back into our study of Revelation. So join us today and welcome to join us again in the fall. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to put on the PowerPoint. Just a minute. So when we're looking at which translation is best, there are 3 questions that we're going to consider. First one is, what is the difference between translation, version, and other types of Bibles? Secondly is, what do we mean by best? And thirdly is, what's wrong with the King James Version? Or why isn't, there's nothing wrong with the King James Version, but why isn't it one of the better recommended translations? So we're going to deal with that. Okay, so the first thing to remember is the Bible was not written in English. Jesus did not speak King James English. So if you want to go back to what does the Bible say, what is the original Bible, you're going back to non-English languages. So the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and there's parts in Aramaic. And even in Hebrew was written over 1,000-year period, and the vowels were added even later. So there are changes in words and grammar, different things like that make it sometimes difficult to translate. And then the Greek is Koine Greek, which is not your classical Greek of Socrates or modern Greek. This is biblical Greek. And we have to ask ourselves, how well did the New Testament authors know Greek? So if they're Jews, they're speaking Aramaic, because that was the language Jesus spoke. They know some Hebrew, at least enough for the liturgical parts in the temple services and synagogue services. And they know Greek as much as they interact with non-Jews. So you might expect differences in writing styles and education levels of this. And certainly in the Gospel of Luke, the tradition is that Luke traveled around the countryside and interviewed people. And what we find in the Gospel is there are parts of Luke that are written in very good Greek, and then there are parts where, someone obviously has told him something, and it's in bad Greek, but good Aramaic. So it's almost as though either they didn't know Greek that well, and so they told it to him, and they made grammatical mistakes, and he didn't correct them. He wrote down exactly what they told him, grammar mistakes and all, or, and this is what we don't know, if he did speak Aramaic, he took what they wrote and he put it into Greek, but he kept that Aramaic structure. So the Gospel of Luke is very hard to translate because the style changes. And we can ask about that in the other books too. Okay, so whenever we're talking about the original Bible, it's going to be the Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. And when we're talking about translations, versions, and anything else, it's going to be the translated Bible. They all have been translated into English and other languages. But we distinguish the types of translations. So translations can be done by one person. And it can be very good, and it can also be very bad. It depends on what that person, what that author knows. How well does the author know the original language? Now, translations like this can usually be done quickly. You're not going through a committee, so you can do a lot yourself. You might call friends and you might share it around to get other input, but it is one person's name that is linked with that translation. So some good translations out there. You have the J.B. Phillips New Testament, and you have William Barclay, his commentaries, and he usually translates, and he'll go into detail about what the words mean and nuances. And of course, you're probably familiar with Eugene Peterson's The Message, done basically by one person. A version, on the other hand, is done by committee. So you're going to have people that are specializing in the Greek, people who specialize in the Hebrew, and they can argue among themselves what they think it means and also how to put it into good English. So versions are usually rated at the top as being the best quality. Translations are underneath. We have other types of Bibles too. Interlinear Bibles, which are basically, they have one line of the original, so Hebrew or Greek, and then they have the words underneath it, and then they have another line. So that's why it's interlinear. It's in between the lines. You'll have study Bibles. And the study Bibles may look different, but they usually are based on an already existing translation. So you might have a study Bible that is using the text of the New International Version. And what they've done is they add notes, they add questions, they might add maps, they add things to help you study the text. They're not translating the text themselves. They're using something that's already been translated. We, of course, also have like a Reader's Digest Bible where I think when it came out, they were advertising that it's only 1/3 as big. So what are they leaving out? You'll have paraphrased Bibles. You'll maybe have children's Bibles, um, picture Bibles, different things. And these aren't really geared to as translations. There's, in a sense, no quality check of how close they are to the original. They exist to introduce people to the Bible. So they're there as teasers. They will tell the story in very simple terms to get you to understand what's going on, to get you interested that you may want to do other reading. So they make no claim to being accurate at all, but they serve a very useful purpose of teasing you, enticing you to want to read more and learn more. So that brings us back to the main question of what do we mean by best? And you stop and think, what are you looking for when you want the best Bible translation? And when you're ready, let's think in a couple minutes, then let's go on. So one of the things is we want it to be the most accurate translation. But what do you mean by accurate? And you're probably going, oh God, give me a break. It can be accurate word for word. It can be accurate idiom for idiom, or accurate understanding, accurate impact. This might be interpreted as accurate by thought. You might also consider, what is the audience? Is this geared for students studying the Bible? Is this geared for children? Is this geared for people with high levels of education, people with low levels of education, or people who have trouble reading? You know, you need to know that audience, because there's a Bible for everyone. So it's just a matter of finding what is the right fit for you. So according to BibleGateway.com, there are two basic approaches: word for word, thought for thought. I would say there's three, but fair enough. At the most accurate in terms of word for word is the interlinear. You see the word in Hebrew and you see the corresponding word in English. There's a problem with interlinear Bibles. They may not make much sense because you've got the Hebrew or the Greek sentence structure and English words. It may not make it easy for us to understand. Also, though, in this word for word category is the King James Version and the Revised Standard Version, the New King James and the New Revised Standard. So when you're into here, you're into that variation. Is it word for word or word for word / idiom for idiom? And I'll give you some examples of that. So those are both sort of in this sort of middle range. Over here where you've got thought for thought, or what's called dynamic equivalency, you have the Good News Bible, the Living Bible, and the Message. This means it's very hard to get from the Message to what the original is. It's very easy to get from King James to what the original is. So that's the spectrum. And there are issues. People will quibble about whether it's the Good News is actually over here because it's a paraphrase, or whether it's here because it's thought for thought, whether the Message is a paraphrase, whether, you can argue about that. But this is a very good introduction to the question. Okay, so now for some fun. Translate from French. Le Bureau des Affaires étranges. All right. If I were to look this up, I would find out that le is simply the, de means of, and it's plural. So bureau is a desk or an office, okay? Affaire is basically French for business. Étrange means strange, or it can mean foreign. So a word for word translation would say the desk of strange business. Now, if you're Canadian and you know French, you're going to say, that's not right. It's accurate, word for word accurate. Okay? It's not right. All right, the Department of Strange Business, or the Office of Strange Business, the Desk of Strange Business. Well, it's actually the Department of External Affairs. And you're going, what? Well, this is an office or a department in the government that deals with foreign affairs, except we call it external affairs because it's external to Canada. So that would be translating it idiomatically. Le Bureau des Affaires étranges is the same as the Department of External Affairs. If you're American, then it's even worse, because idiomatically it would be Le Bureau des Affaires étranges in French and the State Department in English, because America's Foreign Affairs Department is called the State Department. So you're looking for, this is what it is in the original, and this is the same thing in the modern English. And so it's not word for word, it's idiom for idiom. It's not even thought for thought. We have an equivalent for that. Once we get into other things, this is actually a real problem from the Hebrew or Aramaic. The word is ben adam, bar adam in Aramaic. It means son of man. But it's also Hebrew. It's an idiom that means human being. And so you'll have translations that will translate passages like Ezekiel, and they decide against saying human being do this, so they'll say mortal man, because being human means being mortal, we die. So mortal man prophesy. But other translations will say son of man prophesy. And they may capitalize it because it's now a messianic prophecy for Jesus. Was it meant to be a messianic prophecy? Or are we imposing, we decide it is a messianic prophecy, and so we translate the original accordingly. And that's where you suddenly got this problem going back and forth. And why you need to argue it out among other scholars is what reflects the original intent of the author. Some other examples, this is where the Good News sort of went into some problems, because they started translating, the Good News Bible was put out by the Bible Society, and they were translating the Bible for the whole world into hundreds of languages. But they also wanted it to reflect into that culture. So for example, if you're translating the Bible for people who live in the Arctic, the whole image of shepherd and sheep doesn't make sense because there's no sheep in the Arctic. So they're looking at what other animals are there that might fit in. And so you could have the husky dogs, and you'd have sort of a musher and dog relationship, or caribou. Tall trees of Lebanon doesn't make sense when you live above the tree line, and your idea of a tall tree may be a tree that comes up to your knee. So they were changing some of the terms to try to fit in with the culture. And that led to many people saying, wait a second, you're no longer a translation, you're a paraphrase. So they followed that dynamic equivalency, but maybe a little too far. And then there's the impact challenge. And this is something else, is where the Greek or Hebrew is really clear, but we cannot bring ourselves to translate it because it offends us. And so we decided to tidy up the Bible. And so I have an example here from Philippians 3:8. So we're going to take a look at it in several translations. So to begin with, I'll give you the King James Version. Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss, for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ. God's Word translation says, it's far more than that. I consider everything else worthless because I'm better off, much better off, knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. It's because of him that I think of everything as worthless. I threw it all away in order to gain Christ. Okay, so what offensive word do you see here? Or what problematic word do you see? Someone said dung. Okay. And here it's, you count them at dung that I may win Christ. I threw it all away. It was worthless in order to gain Christ. All right, so let's see, test this a bit more and see how other translations translate it. The New International Version says, what is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. Okay, so we've had dung, threw it away, garbage. So we get that idea of the range of meanings. And the problematic word is kubala, and I have no idea how you pronounce that properly. So the Message says, compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus as my master firsthand, everything I once thought I had going for me is insignificant. Dog dung. I've dumped it all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ. And so now you have a much clearer idea of what the offensive word is. It's the skubala, and it's something to do with dung, poop, whatever, and trash. And you're going, okay, what's the problem? Why are translations having issues with this? I'll show you one more. Oops. So here they said rubbish. Okay, so we have that range of things: rubbish, worthless, threw it out, garbage, dung, dog dung. All right, what did the Greek mean? Why is this such a problem in translating? Well, according to my research, when I took a course on Philippians years ago, the word skubala does not appear in Greek literature. We know what it meant. People knew what it meant back then and now, but it was an offensive word that was not fit for literature. So garbage, rubbish, and I've also found refuse in some translations, trash, throw it away. None of those fit. They mean roughly the same thing, but they don't have the same impact on reader that the Greek did on Paul's readers when Paul used the word. So what is the English equivalent? And it's basically crap. I consider all of this to be nothing more than crap. Or you might say SH, okay? You know the word. Okay, we all know the word. We don't want to say it. We don't want to write it. Editors probably would force you to change it. That's the word Paul uses. And you stop and think, what is the impact that he gets by using that word? And all the translations miss that impact because we can't bring ourselves to say the word or write it. So we have a problem, but it's a great point that you can draw on as you're preaching on that verse. Going back to share screen. So this picture comes from the Better Books and Bibles. And again, it's putting it sort of on that continuum. Here is where they put the word for word, the New King James, New American Standard, Revised Standard, and the King James. The Free Dynamic, Good News, Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, New English. I struggle with that because I never thought of the New English as being free or dynamic, but it's very British. Anyway, and then they put New International is somewhere in the middle. So you're trying to get something a little balanced. Revised Standard is here. Okay, so that sort of gives you that range of what are you looking for in the translation. Now, if we go back to the audience, and that's coming up right here, so I'm going to come back, we've got some ideas. So if you've got someone who is studying theology, religion, the Bible, and they want to go back, they're learning the Hebrew, they want to go back to the original manuscript, one of these is probably really good for them because they can see the English and they compare it with the Hebrew or Greek, and they can get back and forth very easily. If you're talking to someone who isn't doing that, doesn't need that kind of literal translation, then something else is better. New International is currently one of the more popular ones because it's sort of a balance between that word for word and dynamic. Okay. So here you have if you've got someone who's younger, you've got youth, you've got children, you might want to give them the message. That assumes you have a grade 4 to grade 5 level of education, very contemporary English. If you've got someone who's more highly educated, again, King James Revised Standard. The New International is geared for grade 7 and grade 8. Now, the New King James is geared for grade 7. So you've got these different levels. And again, you're going to find different charts that will have, will decide it differently. So I'm looking at King James, the authorized version, and I'm like, you have to have more than a grade 12 education to understand it. Most people today, most young people today, it's too hard for them. So I would stay away from that. But that's something else to think of. What are you trying to do? What's your purpose in getting the Bible translation? For study, you want something that's more word for word, idiom for idiom. For meditation, you may want something in the middle. For understanding, you might want something at the lower end. Okay. So that last question is, I keep talking about the King James and saying, this is what's good. So what's so bad about the King James Version? Why don't I recommend it? Okay, well, there's two reasons. One that may or may not matter to you. The other one definitely. Okay, so the archaeology may or may not matter to you. The King James Version was published in 1611, and the source text, because they did go back to the original Hebrew and Greek, and so for the New Testament, they're going back to the 4th century document. It's the Vaticanus manuscript. It's the first complete New Testament manuscript, and that is their source document. So that's in the 17th century, the 1600s. In the 1800s, the 19th century, and the 20th century, 1900s, archaeology has found lots more manuscripts. So we have thousands of manuscripts that predate the Vaticanus. We've got manuscripts that go back to the beginning of the 2nd century and possibly to the end of the 1st century. So within 60 to 70 years of Jesus' death, we have manuscripts, fragments of the New Testament. So we're looking at what is the original text. Is it the first official version that's from about 300 years after Jesus, or is it all these thousands of manuscripts that come much closer to the time of Jesus? And again, the Bible Society has spent time and they've worked evaluating these manuscripts. You can have the Kurt Aland New Testament, and he will, these manuscripts have this phrase, these manuscripts have that phrase, and then they rate based on different criteria, and they'll tell you what the criteria are. This is probably closest to the original. So we're always trying to get back to what was the original text of Luke or Matthew, whatever. So some of the newer translations are based on those new discoveries, the Good News and some of the others, whereas the King James is based on something from 300 years later, because it didn't know about these discoveries. So we know there are other manuscripts that are closer to the original than the King James. If that doesn't bother you, it doesn't matter. That's fine. The problem, and this is the bigger problem, is that English, we don't speak King James English. If you can understand Shakespeare, you can understand the King James Version. If you're struggling with Shakespeare, you're going to struggle with the King James. Shakespeare and the King James Version were about the same time. Shakespeare's writing in the late 1500s, 1600s, and the King James is in 1600s too. So you know what? It's the same English. But modern English is quite different. I can't think of some of the words that have changed meanings over the years, but they do exist. Verb forms definitely have changed. Also, the style of writing has changed. You stop and think, the old language, you'll have lots of passive forms. It is written, where nowadays we'll say Paul writes. So you've got that kind of difference, because it is written also sounds more formal. Paul writes is more direct. Sentence length is a big thing. In the King James, they like long sentences because you have subordinate clauses, coordinate clauses, and punctuation, and verb forms can all be used to guide the reader. Modern English, we've gotten rid of those verb forms, we've gotten rid of some of this other stuff, and we like short sentences. And if you read long sentences, it doesn't make sense. I left the big thing about thou and thine out. If I say, our Father who art in heaven, notice there, it's art, old form. Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thine, thou, thine. It sounds so formal and stilted and proper. It's somewhat regal because it's so old-fashioned. Ask your friends, try it out on them, and they'll say, stop being a pompous ass. But in the 16th, 17th century, it was exactly the opposite. Formal was words like you. When you say thou, we have an expression in French, it's tutoyer. It's the tu, it's the du form if you speak German. It's second person singular. It's the one you use with friends. So imagine you're talking to the Queen of England and you're saying, hey, Queenie, how goes it, buddy? Does that offend you? That was the effect that thou and thine had in 1611. Like, how dare you be that familiar with God? And nowadays, it's exactly the opposite. So that's something to think about. Those are a few reasons why the King James isn't the best translation these days. But that's something to think about, is when you're looking at the text, are you willing to spend the time to not only do the Greek and the Hebrew to English, but also Shakespearean English to modern English? Are you willing to do a study guide as to what it meant back in 1611? Okay, so that's sort of the theory. And now it's really good for you to check and see for yourself which translations you like. So I had a list of these different things, and I think there's a typo for the Proverbs 7, but it doesn't really matter. Just look it up and see what it says, and check it in several different translations. I used BibleGateway.com because it's so easy. Once you've got the passage, you just drop the second line of what translation, and you can search and see it. So, but there's a few other challenges. And so we're going to look at Proverbs 31, verse 10. King James Version, who can find a virtuous woman? The NRSV, a capable wife, who can find? NIV, a woman of noble character. The Good News, how hard is it to find a capable wife? The Living Bible, if you can find a truly good wife. Message, a good woman is hard to find. Oops, so let's go back. What is the problem word? And the problem word is virtuous. And they translated virtuous, capable, noble, capable, good. Wife and woman, okay, that's easy enough. We can cope with that. But that word for virtuous, what's the problem? And if we go back, this is from the Old Testament, so we go back to the Hebrew. And Catherine Bushnell, who wrote a fantastic book that's hard to get through, but still a fantastic book, called God's Word to Women, points out the Hebrew word chayil occurs 42 times in the Old Testament. 38 times it refers to God or man and is translated as strong or powerful. 4 times it refers to woman and is translated as virtuous. Why? What's the difference? When she compared the Hebrew with the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which does exist, it's the Septuagint, she found the Greek translated the Hebrew word as dunamis, which is the Greek word for powerful. So the problem is when they translated from the Greek to English, or from the Hebrew to English, they basically said women cannot be powerful. Women cannot be strong. So what is the woman's equivalence? And the equivalence is virtuous, good, capable. Okay? The bias is not in the Bible. The bias is in the translators who could not imagine the Bible praising a powerful woman or a strong woman. And how often does that happen? That our blinders prevent us from seeing what the Bible's really saying. And that's something to think about when you're looking at translations. Certainly by saying capable, they sort of avoid the conflict. But what do you mean by capable? Okay, another translation was Psalm 23. Okay, very famous. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down. King James. So I'm just looking at verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2. And right away, there's a problem. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. I know what it's saying, but my gut reaction is, I have just said, the Lord's my shepherd that I don't want. I don't want the Lord. I don't want God. He's the shepherd I don't want. That's sure that doesn't sound right. He maketh me to lie down. And it's like, oh God. Okay. This is your old English that's coming through. So the NRSV stays very, very close. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Same problem. He makes me lie down. Okay, I understand. I don't have to cope with that. He maketh me to lie down. New International, and you see, they've changed that. They recognize I shall not want is a little problematic in modern English. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Yay, got it. He makes me lie down. Got it. Good News Bible, they go a little bit further. The Lord's my shepherd, I have everything I need. And he lets me rest. Like he makes me lie down as like, grab you, push you down. He lets me rest. I like that image. The Living Bible, now instead of saying the Lord's my shepherd, I have everything I need, and letting me make connection, it's making the connection for me. Because the Lord's my shepherd, I have everything I need. And he lets me rest. I have a problem with that because I like to make that connection myself, but it's still clear. The Message, I would not use this translation ever. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You've bedded me down. And at that point, I'm going, you bed down a horse. Why did you do that? I struggle with that. But there's something else, because the message has lost something that I find very powerful about the psalm. And I'll come back to it. And the Jerusalem Bible says, Yahweh is my shepherd. I lack nothing. In meadows of green grass, he lets me lie. Okay. So the Jerusalem Bible did something quite radical. And I think the New Jerusalem Bible, they're going back to the old way. If you notice here, you have Lord, and it's all uppercase, it's capitals. This is because the Hebrew is the name of God. And for Jews, they would never say God's name. Whenever you see that word for God's name, you would read the Lord. So all these translations are copying that. Message doesn't. Jerusalem Bible says, oh, the heck with that. We know God's name. One, it's Jesus. But two, we think it's Yahweh, is what those 4 consonants in Hebrew mean. It's the name Yahweh. So I'm just going to say Yahweh is my shepherd. And it brings God closer right away. So I like it. I lack nothing. In meadows of green grass, he lets me down. Now, what they've done is they've reversed, he makes me lie down in green pastures. They've just switched the two. In green pastures, he makes me lie down. But they're creating a type of poetry. So the King James and NRSV is very poetic, because they're the way they've translated it captures a rhythm. Some of these other translations, they're working to make sure it's clear that we understand what's going on, and they lose the poetry. The Jerusalem was trying to struggle between those two and manage to capture some of that poetry again. So that's one reason why I like it. Now, the problem with the message and where it's powerful. I use Psalm 23 a lot for funerals. And sometimes I'll do the whole service around the psalm. Sometimes I don't. But I'll point out something. So the psalm starts, the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me, he restores my soul. Fine. So I've got all this information about what God is like. It's all the stuff I've learned over my life, from sermons, from Bible studies, from Sunday school, all that kind of stuff. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Okay? When I go through a crisis, when something has happened, my whole world is upside down, my relationship with God changes. No longer is it he and everything I've learned. Somehow in my tragedy, God connects with me directly. And he now becomes a real person. To me, that is so powerful. He connects with me as a person in my lowest and moments when I am most prone to despair. That's where God finds me. In the message, I miss that, because it's there. Oh yeah, he's my shepherd. Hey God, I don't need, you've bedded me down. You've done this, and you're with me when there's no sudden realization of how powerful God is. So I do struggle with, I will not use the message for Psalm 23. And I think I don't think I've ever used the message for any of the Psalms. I prefer some of the others. Okay, so there's your information. So which translation, which Bible, which version is best for you? And the answer is simple. It's the one you understand, the one that comes alive for you, the one that you want to read. you like it, you enjoy reading it, you're going to use it. There's no point having a fancy Bible that's really a top quality Bible that sits on your coffee table and you never look at it. Not going to do you any good. But a Bible that, who cares where it is on the chart, but you like it and you're going to read it and you're going to enjoy it. That's the best one for you. So there's the list of passages again. Take your pick, try them in 3 or 4 different translations and see what you like. I've already told you I don't like the Message for the Psalms. I love the Jerusalem Bible for the Psalms, but I like the Message for something else. So don't be afraid that you may want more than one Bible. You may want the New International because it is sort of middle of the road, and you want the Message, and you want the NRSV because of the Psalms. It's poetry and you enjoy poetry. So, you know, the more Bibles you have, different translations, better. You may want one with big font and small font and pocket, one that you can carry, or one that you can, has a thicker paper that you can write notes in. Take your pick. And that's it for today. So hope that helps you and that you've enjoyed some of the stuff that you've learned here. And thank you for joining me. Once again, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, and I look forward to seeing you in the fall. Take care and God bless, and have a great summer. Stay safe.